Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon if you're following us from Asia. We have many people joining this conversation online. My name is David Bach. I'm the president of IMD. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you to this conversation on redrawing the geography of jobs. We have a terrific panel that I'll introduce in a moment, but let me say a word first on why this is such an important topic and conversation here at the annual meeting, as well as in many other settings at this time. Of course, much of the conversation is about artificial intelligence, the promise, the potential of AI. There is an important conversation almost right away about the impact on jobs, and that conversation is very often framed around the skills that are required, organizational changes, and we sometimes lose sight that one of the most important questions when it comes to the future of work is in fact the geography of work and the demography of work and how that is emerging and evolving. And of course, while we're going to talk in this panel about the impact of technology, it's really important to have this broader global perspective on where work is going to be and how we get people ready to take advantage of the opportunities of that. We have a terrific panel. I'll introduce each panelist, and then we'll get going into the conversation, and we'll involve all of you, of course, as well. I'm going from my left all the way down. Hisayuki Edokoba, Deko, is the President, Chief Executive Officer, and Representative Director of the Board of Recruit Holdings from Japan. Welcome to you. We have Amy Pope, delighted to have you, Director General of the International Organization for Migration, based in Geneva. Next to her is Erika Kramer-Mbula. She's Professor of Economics, and she's at the University of Johannesburg in South Africa. We're very glad to have you. And at the end, Nacho De Marco, Founder and Chief Executive Officer of BearsDev USA. Welcome to you as well. So, Deko, why don't we jump right in? You said in our previous conversation your team has prepared you with a lot of data that you're keen to share with us. As you look high level at demographic, geographic, geoeconomic, technological shifts affecting the labor market, what does the data tell you? What are some of the key trends that you think every leader needs to be aware of?
Yeah, so we, Recruit Holdings, are global tech company. Through our portfolio companies like Indeed.com or Glassdoor.com, we are having over 300 million job seekers every month, and 3.5 million employers are trying to hire people through our platforms like Indeed.com. And what we are seeing is a huge, more like a long-term demographic change of almost all developed countries. And so basically all developed countries workers are getting to be old, aging population, right? And so, for example, in the US, we don't have good growth of a working age population from the native-born workers' point of view. And in the US, last 5 years, US added 4 million workers, but 90% of these workers are immigrants. And when we think about each segment, 68% of farmers are immigrants and agricultural jobs, and 30% of hospitality workers and 30% of factory workers are immigrants, and 25% of healthcare workers are immigrants. So, of course, there's more conversation in all developed countries' government about more like a restrictive policy about the immigrants, but immigrants are having huge role of all developed countries' labor market. And it's not only US, and of course Canada, Australia have roughly 26% of workers are immigrants, and US is 19%, and Germany has high teens, and France is 10%, Japan is 3%, but overall immigrants are getting to be more important. And one interesting thing is, like, for example, we see general uptick trend of job clicks are coming from outside these countries. So for example, in the UK, roughly 5% of job clicks are coming outside of the UK. It's growing compared with the pre-pandemic level, which was 3%. And also from employers' side, we see kind of interesting data, which is like English not required job. And for example, in UK, roughly 5%-ish 3%-ish of jobs are English not required jobs. In Netherlands, almost 8% not required Dutch, and Spain is almost 6%. And in general, these trends are growing. And also one more thing, especially in UK, visa sponsorship jobs are also increasing. And for example, like pharmacy job is almost 4%, 4 to 5% jobs are saying visa sponsorship. So that's the change, big trend we are seeing with the demographic change and basically the policy changes.
Thank you for that. And you made the link, of course, immediately to migration. If you have jobs in one place and a young workforce in another place, there's pressure to move. And of course, seeking better employment and a better livelihood is an important driver of migration. Amy, what is it that you see in your data? Does it correspond to what Deco just shared? To what extent does the geography of jobs impact migratory patterns?
It has a huge impact. I mean, and I think it's important, especially at this moment in time when we are watching a new American administration come in, which is really focused on irregular migration. Likewise, in Europe, we've seen a very significant uptick in irregular migration. And what we are realizing when you speak to many of the people who are coming across is that fewer than 50% of them, often 40% of them, are coming because they're seeking asylum. Frankly, many, the majority of people are coming because they just don't have job opportunities at home. And they know, because the evidence is showing us, that if they can make it into the United States, if they can make it into Europe, they will find employment in the informal sector, right? And so that then fuels more irregular migration. What we're also seeing, though, is that there are huge pressures on communities, lack of economic opportunity. You look at the population of Africa, which has the highest growing number of young people, but not the same kind of growth in terms of job opportunities. So when you think about how are we going to meet the needs of the future, we don't have jobs to match talent, for example, across the continent. But within North America, within Europe, within Japan and the Republic of Korea, we don't have the talent to match the jobs. It's also really important to recognize this is not just about doctors and engineers and high-tech workers, which is, I know, what we all talk about. Yeah. It's things like construction and nursing care, elder care, service industry, the things that our AI are not going to be able to plug.
Thank you for that. So jobs in one place, a youthful population in another. You mentioned Africa already, Erica. The data are clear. We have aging populations just about everywhere. Africa is the one place where we have growth in the young population. You'll probably share some data with us. What are the opportunities to create more employment in Africa, to leverage what is often referred to as this demographic dividend that Africa is experiencing now?
Yes, it's interesting because we are referring to Africa as the young continent, and when I talk to my historian and paleontologist colleagues, they always remind me that this is the oldest continent when it comes to the origin of civilization and the cradle of humankind.
Let's say youthful rather than youngest. That's better.
Exactly, but in terms of demographics, it is a young continent. 60% of our population are below the age of 25. It stands out as a beacon of youth in the labor force, looking in the present and looking into the future. By 2050, about 1 out of 3 people, if not more, of people of working age would be African.
Yeah.
So yes, it's about how do we use this as an opportunity for transformative change, and also to establish Africa as a pool as a hub for global talent. We would like to prepare young Africans to serve the needs for talent in other parts of the world, but also to create opportunities where they are. And I think that is the key. And perhaps those 2 objectives can be achieved simultaneously due to the opportunities that are open through remote work, and several countries are already tapping into that. We have a growing tech hub ecosystem in the continent. You see cities like Cape Town, Nairobi, Lagos, with this bubbling ecosystem of entrepreneurs that are contributing with their work to global markets, but also creating opportunities and jobs for others. Now, is that happening at a sufficient scale? Obviously not. And what kind of actions need to be taken from both private sector and government is another part of the discussion that perhaps I can engage. I think there are great opportunities. I just listened in the previous session to Vice President Al Gore who was talking about the opportunities in the green economy.
Yeah.
And Africa stands out as having sort of all the ingredients for this perfect storm, right? It's got a young population that is eager to learn, that is eager to succeed, that is eager to work, that is increasingly utilizing digital technologies, that has a deep understanding of social issues, often from lived experience, that lives in an environment, I mean, there's the urban and the rural, but there's in a context of rich natural resources.
Yes.
How do you tap into all of that and provide the necessary skills, technical skills that can supplement that more experiential, lived knowledge and expertise that can be a great advantage for green jobs?
You describe Africa as a global talent hub and future global talent hub. Just a quick aside, IMD, we're a relatively small business school, but at this point, almost 10% of our staff is in Cape Town. And we set up an innovation hub, and the talent is extraordinary, but not only the talent, as you described, it's the passion, the energy, the commitment. So we're incredibly grateful to be able to tap into that talent. And of course, you know, that's a very skilled population there, but the issue of skills, Nacho, is one that you think about a lot, because it's not just enough to say jobs here, a young population there, technology that can connect them. We need the skill development, and that's an area where you and your team at Bears Dev do a lot of work. Tell us a bit about how you're using technology to help upskill such that places like Africa and many others around the world can become these talent hubs.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. Obviously, there's a lot that technology has done already to allow regions where traditionally wouldn't get access to quality jobs start getting into high-paying jobs that substantially increase the quality of life. However, there's a lot to be done. And some of the things technology has done, for example, you can start even from identifying today through a market skill gap analysis with technologies that didn't exist before, processing large volumes of data. And even Deco can probably attest to this. Their company can even tell you pretty much what skills are in demand, what skills are not. And that leads to a number of different things that come after. I would say potentially the second thing I would talk about has to do with AI-powered recruitment platforms and technologies that allow you to match people that have certain skills with the jobs you need to fill in a much more effective way than you could do before. This is not future technology. That technology is already there. We use it internally, but we're just one example of a company that does that. Companies can do it very efficiently, very quickly, and very well. That not only allows you to fill jobs that you need to fill, because the interesting part is that although you may argue, and it's true, that in certain geographies they're not really well protected and they're not getting really quality jobs, at the same time there is certain gap somewhere that can be filled with that region that maybe does not get that. So by allowing you to understand skills for individuals and people and what's needed, you can automatically, if you will, and much more efficiently match those things. There are certain other things which have really helped a lot. I believe, obviously, we're a living testament of that, but remote work enablement. And of course, I'll talk about some other jobs as well, who may not be tech-related, of course, or maybe not in an office, if you will. But remote work enablement, things like Starlink, I haven't really heard a lot of people through this week in Davos talk about Starlink and what that really implies. We hire people everywhere, mostly in Latin America, but everywhere in little towns, really rural areas. And without internet, even if you're the most brilliant engineer or you're the most brilliant worker, it's very, very hard to really get a job. High quality jobs, for the most part, require you to have some sort of internet access, right? I heard from a person who runs W3C that about 30% of the world does not have access to internet. I don't know if you can grasp that idea for a second. Imagine your lives without internet, right? And so Starlink
sounds amazing.
I know, right?
Yeah, but my wife would be very happy with it. But that said, imagine how hard it can be, right?
Sure.
And the fact that now they have access to internet, of course, governments need to do their job to, have those technologies, have the regulations in place to get that going as fast as they possibly can. But that opens up possibilities for a lot of people who, up to yesterday, they couldn't really get those jobs. There are more. There's actually, we talked about migration. Migration today is hot topic, right? We're going to hear a lot in the coming months, especially in the United States. I think we all know it. I'm a living example of migration. I moved to the United States over a decade ago to look for better opportunities. Did I want to? Not really. I would have rather stayed at home with my family, with my friends, with my community. If you really allow different geographies to get quality jobs, not only they're going to be better off, but this conversation about migration may just almost entirely go away. So just wanted to comment on that because I feel like we always talk about that, and there's certainly things you can do to sort of remove that conversation, if you will.
Can I just say, I don't think it's going to go away. I think it's going to be a different conversation.
Correct.
I think at some point we're going to have the economies of Europe and the United States and Canada and everybody else fighting over migrants to come and work in these jobs where they do not have the talent they need to meet the workforce needs or the labor needs.
Because it is indeed perplexing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you look at the geography of jobs and you feel that the immigration debate, particularly the way it has been framed in rich countries recently, is the exact opposite of what the debate ought to be. It should be about how do we attract the talent to meet the needs. Would either of you want to speak? I don't know, Deka, if you see this in your data, or Amy, and some of the research that you do, what does it look like when countries actually do that well, when they lean into the opportunities that migration provides around jobs? You mentioned, Deko, that a growing percentage of jobs on your platform now come with visa sponsorship. It sounded like it's still a relatively small percentage, but what does that look like when companies and when countries lean into the opportunities that migration provides around jobs?
Okay, is anybody doing it well? That's what you're thinking.
That's the question I'm asking.
So let me just give you a little bit of information. The U.S., for example, has about 66,000 visas for lower skilled workers.
Yeah.
But the U.S. has an unemployment rate in construction that is at 0%. Right, 66,000 workers is not enough construction workers to rebuild homes post this crazy fires that are playing out in Southern California right now. Yeah. Right, so how does anybody then rely on the regular migration system to meet their workforce needs?
Yes.
There are great examples. I think probably the country that I hold out as a standout here is Canada.
Yeah.
But, and this is a huge but, Canada has looked at it only from the labor market needs and family reunification needs, they actually haven't then taken into account what's the impact on housing, what's the impact on social services, what's the impact on urban growth. So they actually are having a backlash moment where people are saying, wait a minute, do we have too many migrants come in because we don't have housing? But the construction industry is saying, but we need more migrants to build the housing.
Interesting.
Right? So it really needs to be a much broader conversation.
Go ahead, Erica.
Such an interesting discussion, because I think it's, from an African perspective, it's also about balancing that with not hollowing out the skills that we sorely need, right? We need engineers, we need technicians, we need to build our green economy, our manufacturing sector, our services. So I think obviously it's a balancing act, right, on how to do that. And I think from the African perspective, it's important to do skills development and invest massively on skills development. And there are excellent programs, examples in South Africa, in Rwanda, in Ghana, all over the place about how to do this effectively and how to do it well. It's a matter of scaling it up, always the issue of funding, and also supplementing that with access to capital and finance, support for SMMEs, which are the largest employer in the continent. So create an ecosystem that can absorb some of those skills so they can contribute to build the communities, the regions, the countries, while at the same time supporting the global labor markets. And I think that is something that needs to be discussed in terms of multilateralism and cooperation and coming together and thinking about how do we also take advantage of the possibilities of remote work. Listen, when people are talented and skilled, not everybody wants to leave. Some people want to stay in their communities and work within their context and so on. So, but if there's not enough to absorb their skills, if there's not enough industry, if there's not enough economic activity, they will have to go to apply their skills somewhere else. So, I think it's a yeah.
Yeah, and to add on top of what Erica just said, technology has actually made education significantly easier. Significantly easier. AI particularly, for generating content, for training, it's extraordinary, right? AI has advantages and disadvantages, but that's a clear advantage. Think about platforms like Udemy, Coursera, Duolingo, but there are many more, even for training, construction workers, for training, manufacturing workers. Technology has really allowed us to lower the cost of education significantly. And I think not only this is applicable to governments, where should probably take a lead and try to educate their workers, but even companies. I think this is really applicable to everyone here in this room, probably. So that's something that I'm very confident that as cost of education lowers, potentially more and more people in different geographies may be able to get simply better jobs.
So let's explore both of these things, right? So we talked about migration as one way of achieving this matching of where jobs are and where people are. But Erica, your point is so well taken. This hollowing out is a real concern. And in the past, the price for those communities has been high when people migrated elsewhere. Let's talk about the other way then, bringing jobs to where people are, which we can do in two ways, via technology and physically. Let's explore the physical part second. We'll talk about manufacturing and investments in places like Africa. But let's start with the remote part of it. Deco, can you share with us some data or insights? Is this, are we kidding ourselves? You mentioned Starlink. Those of us here in the room, we work with technology all the time. We are the, I'm generalizing here a little bit, but I assume we're the lucky ones who during the pandemic stayed at home, kept working. But of course, we know that was not possible for so many people. So what is it that is possible with technology in terms of moving work digitally to other parts of the world?
Yeah, so for example, the remote work is, of course, it peaked up to like 7% or 8% of the US job posting had a remote work. And it was originally like 3%-ish. It was originally 7%-ish and went up like 14%.
Okay.
And it's now it was originally 3% and went up 14%, and now it's 7%. So it's almost double compared with the pre-pandemic level. So remote work is here. It's coming down, but still way higher than pre-pandemic level. But as you said, we realized in the pandemic period, remote work is such a privilege for especially desk workers, white collar workers.
Yes.
And 70, 80%, 75-ish percentage of jobs are, some kind of deskless workers, right, or blue collar workers. So basically, as you said, AI, and also Amy said that AI can change a lot of jobs, but mainly that's like desk workers or white collar workers.
Yep.
And the challenge is, because especially younger generation prefer to be more like a white collar worker type of jobs, and they tend to don't want to try to do like outside work or construction workers. They say like it's a little bit tough job. And sometimes still I heard that government folks are thinking, oh, we need more jobs of like healthcare worker job. But the reality is younger generation don't want to do this, especially native born workers don't want to do that. And as a result, some migrants are covering up. That's the current situation. And so remote work is very important, but still not good enough. So we need to have some kind of a robotics type of AI work should be done, but it will take time.
Can I ask a question actually of one of these guys, maybe, because I suspect the answer, but I'd love to test it, which is actually the digitalization is the fastest place where AI is going to swallow up jobs, right? So if I think about young people I would hire for data processing, for analysis of conflicts or whatever, right now I can just ask ChatGPT what is the impact of blah 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 blah, and I get fantastic talking points, by the way, which is the jobs that normally our 20-somethings would do, right? So that feels like the area of work that is going to disappear fastest. Whereas the area of work around, service, construction, et cetera, will continue. But that's my hypothesis. I'd love to know.
So I gave an unfortunate answer because I was asked by a major media outlet what I thought about that, and I said, well, some people say that even the jobs for journalists may go away. So that didn't go very well. But fundamentally, I believe in a lot of the, call it office jobs, productivity, at least in the short to mid-term, it's going to increase significantly. We're already seeing that in engineering, software engineering. Productivity is just going up. And in the case of software, for example, software just getting better. Users have more demands. And what AI is doing currently is just making everything we produce, not as a company, in general, every other company, significantly better. Now, you can say, well, that eventually may keep going for 5, 10 years. Hard to tell. Eventually, in 20 years from now, how office jobs are going to look like, and it's a much more complicated answer because AI is changing so quickly that even things we didn't think were going to be here today are already here and much more advanced than we thought, right? So, can we really predict what's going to happen in 20 years? It's very hard. But one thing that for sure will help is having governments and companies reskilling their workforce. That's definitely going to be key to make sure that no one's left behind.
So this is a very eye-opening, right? So many of us assume that so much work can be done remotely, but you just shared with us some really compelling numbers that is not the case. So then the impact of technology on this is very much around the opportunity to reskill. And Erica, you begin to talk about what some of the things are that government and the private sector has to do to create the environment for the attraction of jobs locally, and not just remote work, white-collar work, but manufacturing, advanced services, and of course, if you look at the continent itself, the development of the continent, the infrastructure, the housing, and so on. Talk a little bit about how you think and what you see in your work about what governments and businesses can and must do to create a more favorable environment to attract jobs and create jobs locally.
Right. So there are very interesting initiatives, as I mentioned, all over the continent. In South Africa, there is the Harambee youth initiative that has trained, I think it's about 600,000 youth and placed them in good jobs over the years. There's great initiatives related to IT skills in Rwanda, initiatives in Ghana and so on, where the figures speak for themselves about what can you do when you train the youth on the right skills. And I think the right skills is the key there, because there's a big it's not about training only, it's about that mismatch that may exist between what the market needs and what the youth is being skilled on. And I think that I wanted to bring a point about the African context, and we are talking about what is happening in businesses and how to reskill people and how remote work will change. But let's remember that 80% of employment in Africa is informal.
Yes.
And it spans across all sectors: retail, manufacturing, services of all types, and so on. We also have subsistence agriculture. So we often talk about structural change as moving away from low productivity agricultural activities into more manufacturing and high-tech services. But perhaps it's about reskilling and adding skills to those that are already in that employment and see how can we supplement that experiential expertise that they have and supplement it with technical skills so they can advance into more productive and better jobs types of activities. And I think that is the key, because when we talk about the opportunities of digital technologies and AI, we often forget about that 80%. How do we connect those two dimensions? And I think that the moment that we manage to do that, and there are initiatives that have started to tap into that space, but it's work in progress. I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
I would agree, and of course we've been speaking about the continent as if it were homogenous, and it isn't. There are migratory patterns within Africa, again, often driven by jobs or camps outside of Johannesburg and Cape Town of people who are looking for work there. And so your point is well taken about supporting people in the work they're currently doing and helping them do better. I was recently in India and spoke to a young entrepreneur, social entrepreneur, who's using AI to help subsistence farmers actually drive yields by helping them, anticipate weather patterns, deal with bugs, and so on. There's so much opportunity there. Right?
Can agriculture become a high-tech sector? And if so, what kind of services can be built around that as well? So yes, I think
in a decentralized way to strengthen communities. I'd love to see if there's some questions from the audience that we can add to the contribution. If you'd please identify yourself and then state your question. Thank you. Do we have I think we'll have microphones. Otherwise, you. No, we gotta. There are people watching online. You can't shout.
Hello. Yeah. Hello. Can you hear me? I'm Suin Lee. I'm one of the social entrepreneur working in education sector. So in Korea, actually 85% to 90% of population graduated from the university. So 90% of population is getting university degree. But however, in Korea, only 40% of jobs are so far white-collar job. So large number of population just are staying at home, preparing the job exam for the government workers or whatever, and eventually giving up to work outside. And then all those blue-collar jobs we really needed are actually come from immigrants. So in construction, 90% of the workers there under 60 are from immigrant working, and only old generation who actually trained to move the body are actually working as a blue-collar job, but they are also aged. So my question is this. So you are all discussing about all those remote work and immigrants, and the immigrants are filling the blue-collar job, and the domestic children are actually all just aiming to the white-collar job, and some of them are actually giving up. So does it actually give any implication to the education system that push everybody into more intellectual job and expect them to become white-collar workers going to the university and actually doesn't care about the society design in 20 years later?
Thank you. So we talked about skill shortage. Now we're talking about populations where perhaps too many people go to university. Any thoughts on this one? Do you want to jump in?
I want to give
Akshay,
a
and then-
relatively challenging answer, maybe unpopular. But while I definitely understand the problem of developed countries in terms of, the need for blue-collar workers, local blue-collar workers, and I understand that's a problem in Korea and probably in most of the developed society. It's not the case for the majority of the population, right? If you go to the biggest countries in the world and some of the most poor countries in the world, that's not necessarily a topic that bothers them as much. I would argue that potentially the opposite to some degree is happening, where you don't have a population. Korea is a fantastic country with 85 to 90%, you said, people who have college degrees. But that's not really representative of the world. We're, 8 billion people by now. Arguably, that's not the case for the vast majority of the population. Of course, pretty much almost everyone here has a great college degree. But that's not really what you're going to find pretty much everywhere around the world. And I believe potentially education is what made Korea a fantastic country historically. Of course, with its flaws as every other country. But Korea invested a significant part of their budget in education in the last decades, and as such, the level of poverty actually decreased significantly. And arguably, in my opinion, well, that's what most of the developing world should do if they want to become the future Korea. And of course, I'm not saying that problem does not need to be solved. Of course, the problem of having people who don't want to take a blue-collar job needs to be solved, but arguably, my view, that's not representative of the most of the population around the world.
I'm going to give a counter to this because I was in Cote d'Ivoire and Senegal last week, and there actually is a similar issue playing out in Cote d'Ivoire because they've put a high premium on education. They're ending up in a situation, I've heard the same thing in South Africa actually, end up in a situation with lots of highly trained workers, but big labor gaps in the vocational sector. So there is this very inefficient system of matching talent to national needs. And I think it starts, the first place where we advise a government start is to map it out and to identify what are the skills you need, what are the skills you have, what are the skills you're going to need in the next 10, 20 years, and how are you preparing your workforce for that? Now, I think one of the issues we need to take into account is that increasingly we're going to look at regional economies. Right? West Africa is a really good example. There's already a lot of informal migration happening, people working in the informal sector, but we don't yet have sort of regional planning going on to look at the development of the workforce, what skills they have, what skills they need. And I think that's actually a starting place. And then thinking about maybe we do want to encourage more kids to go into vocational work. Now the thing about Korea, which actually is a really interesting parallel with Cote d'Ivoire, Cote d'Ivoire was built on the French system. If you all know the French system, it's extremely rigorous and lots of kids will really struggle to reach the highest levels. So they have a high dropout rate. Right? So there's a ton of pressure, and this happens in Korea too, a ton of pressure on young people to succeed in these exams. So what if we took some of that pressure out, made some investments in the vocational track, and make that sort of good, well-paying jobs, right? Make that a worth the investment of families.
Is there a cultural discourse dimension to this? Have we not created a situation where that kind of work, that vocational work, is appreciated in society?
I think there's one like chicken or egg type of problem, which is like my father is a roof carpenter, and I hated to be roof carpenter because the salary was not so great.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to be rich. That's why I studied, and I became like I was trying to be more like software engineer to make money. So again, like what I'm saying is like, okay, there's so many jobs. Okay, let's retrain these people to be construction worker. Like, they don't want to be that.
Yeah,
right?
they're not getting paid it.
So again, what I'm saying is more like, of course the government, whatever, will try it, but there is some kind of a labor market, as a capitalism, right? So what we saw is lower demand of the computer programmers in the U.S. Compared with the pre-pandemic. Probably, AI is, helping the productivity.
Yeah.
And 70%, 80% higher demand for healthcare workers. But still, of course, last 5 years, the salary increase ratio, these, healthcare workers and construction workers are higher than developers last 5 years. But still, there's a huge gap. So I think if this capitalism really works well, it's chicken and problem.
Sure.
So there should be re-evaluation of these jobs, which is having high demand.
Yeah.
We need to pay more
Yeah.
to fill these positions.
Very good. Yes.
I'm Shona, one of the Schwab Fellows from South Africa. And I just had a question. Maybe one of you could put some light on the need for employment for people with disabilities, given there are 2 billion people with disabilities in the world. That is close to 1 in 4 moving that way now. How is that being accommodated? And is it valued in terms of the diversity that people bring into the workplace from that perspective in the sort of recruitment and job creation roles? And how is that playing out in terms of the education and skills development being provided in support of that?
Thank you. Any of you like to speak to the question? Maybe I'll say from a sort of academic and business school perspective, I think the conversation about disability in a labor context is a really, really important and increasingly prominent dimension of the work more broadly on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think we've spent a lot of time, appropriately so, on visible diversity, and the greater focus on neurodiversity and the role of disability helps surface dimensions of diversity that often colleagues are not aware of, that employers are not aware of. So I can't give you as precise an answer as I'd like about how that then factors into hiring strategies and skill building strategies. But I think your point is exactly right, that as we're thinking about the evolution of work, an additional dimension is to account not just for demographic diversity, geographic diversity, racial, ethnic diversity, but also diversity in terms of ability and disability.
I would
Specifically on the knock-on effect to families,
Yeah.
who then you end up with 70% of the global population affected in some way by
Yeah.
disability because
Yeah.
people cannot get work. So, okay.
Thank you so much. It's hard to believe that the conversation is already coming to an end, and those of us on the days, we can actually see there is a clock ticking back there. And so I'll do my very best to try to summarize or at least formulate a couple of takeaway points from a very, very engaging and interesting conversation. I'll state this as a hypothesis. I think the mismatch, an attempt to match jobs and people is going to be one of the defining features of our global politics over the next decades. And I think it's going to be increasingly important on the agenda of businesses and executives. At the end of the day, what is it that businesses do? They bring together people and equip them to achieve things collectively that they could not do on their own. And of course, the World Economic Forum has published again the Future of Job Report, and I just encourage all of you interested in this, if you haven't already read it, to scan the QR code, and I know a number of you have contributed to producing the report. And so, at the very least, we have 3 ways of thinking about this. Migration is one way of bringing people to jobs, and we know the politics around this, and Amy, I hope that we get quickly to the point where countries compete to attract the best global talent as opposed to closing borders and keeping talent out. A second one, of course, is remote work, and more of that is going to be possible in the future. But at the end of the day, in a world where work tends to be still physical and local, and where we don't want to hollow out communities, we have to bring work to where people are, and that means either creating it locally, indigenously, or more investment. And again, I'd encourage all of us in positions of responsibility to think about that mismatch of people and jobs and to adapt our strategies accordingly to create opportunities where they're most needed. Thank you so much to this excellent panel, and thank you for your questions.
Thank you.